think everyone's probably seen these images by now. Donald Trump in a McDonald's apron, bagging fries and handing out food at the drive-in window. The whole episode perfectly captures something about Trump. I mean, campaign photo op stunts are part of electoral politics everywhere, right? Every day. But this entire thing was completely fabricated, right? The McDonald's in Feasterville, Pennsylvania was closed to the public for the day. It was just a set for the day to host a Republican presidential candidate. And then the customers who went through the drive-thru were pre-selected by the franchise and the local Trump campaign. A person familiar with the event told NBC News. It's also not true that all the burgers he handed out had already had a bite taken out of them. That's not true. A lot like his stunt at the barbershop in my home borough of the Bronx last week, right? There was a huge security tent outside blocking people from seeing inside. Some of the people inside wore "Make Barbers Great Again" shirts. One guy said he'd never met the other people there before.
I think we could say here collectively, I met all these guys today for the first time, but we all love America just like you. And that's why we're here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Really
President.
nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Real natural. Trump's regular guy photo ops, they always have this sort of vaguely dear leader feel to it, right? Like this image making the rounds on the internet of a shirtless Benito Mussolini, former fascist dictator in Italy, threshing wheat in the 1930s, like doing his version of 1930s McDonald's. Exact same campy uncanniness as Trump and a McDonald's and a Bronx barbershop. It's not the only thing Trump has in common with some of the worst figures in history. As Ann Applebaum points out in The Atlantic, by using terms like the enemy within and calling immigrants vermin who are poisoning the blood, Trump knows exactly what he's doing. He understands which era and what kind of politics this language evokes. Ann Applebaum, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, staff writer for The Atlantic, joins me now. And I like the piece you wrote because it's very historically grounded, and I do think, there's been this debate about the appropriateness of that term as applied to Donald Trump, and the uniqueness of American historical development, blah, 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 blah. Why does it matter to you in some ways that the language he's using connects so clearly to some of the worst people in human history?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that people know this is not normal language. It hasn't been used before in American politics, not in presidential politics or mainstream politics. Calling your political opponents the enemies within, or using terms like vermin, or cold-blooded killers to describe people you don't like. This is some of the language, as I said, is borrowed directly from. It's funny. I mean, it's not just people keep talking about Hitler or Mussolini, but actually Stalin used language like that. Mao used language like that. The East German Stasi used language like that, and they did it for a reason. They did it because they were trying to dehumanize their political enemies, to say these people don't count. You don't have to think about them. You can do what you want to them. You can commit violence against them. They don't have any rights. They aren't, they're not human beings. They're not citizens. And using that language, I think he's evoking that idea of violence. I mean, he also does it by talking vaguely about letting the police do whatever they want for one day, or being a dictator for one day. He's sort of implying the use of violence. And I think he's doing it on purpose to excite a part of the electorate that likes that language. I think that's pretty hard for some people to accept, but I think it's important that we understand what he's doing, because he seems to know what he's doing.
Yeah. What I think is important about that, and I've been really thinking a lot about this recently, into the wee hours of the morning, so I'm in bed without sleeping, that there's a certain degree to which you can say this sorts of language can be quite effective. It has an effectiveness, and that the degree to which there's a kind of tacit or even explicit, essentially elite prohibition on it, or that the sort of contestants for power are we don't say things like that because it's wrong, ends up being a kind of guardrail that has been blown past. Mm-hmm. And the question is whether you can, just how effective it is when sort of presented to the electorate.
No, I mean, look, it was effective in the 1930s. It's been effective since then. It destroys taboos. It makes people feel like they've entered a new era. Things are possible. They might be, it implies if you're on his side, it implies you're part of some kind of tough, winning, powerful movement that will destroy the unimportant enemies. That,
Yes.
You're part of a mass movement, and that's something that's always appealed to human beings. It's funny, I've actually just returned from Germany today, and there I was repeatedly asked about this. And people would say to me, well, how is it possible that Americans are attracted to this kind of language? And I would look at my interlocutors and I'm saying, from your history, you don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's happened before. It's happened repeatedly.
Yeah, and it's not one of the things I think one of the reasons it works is because it is not shtick. It is partly shtick, but also genuinely held. I mean, here's John Kelly talking about Trump and Hitler, literally. Here's what he had to say about recalling conversations with Donald Trump, former chief of staff of the president, who admired certain aspects of Hitler, saying he commented more than once, Hitler did some good things too. And of course, in history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if Hitler was all about, you'd be pretty hard to make an argument he did anything good. He talked about wanting to have generals like Hitler's generals, which again, not really understanding the full story there of Hitler's generals. But I do think this desire for essentially absolute power, building the cult of personality, part of its effectiveness is that it's a genuine aspiration of his.
No, and this is the thing that he has in common with autocrats around the world, is he wants to rule without any checks and balances, without any norms, without any guardrails, without independent courts, without independent media. And people like him in other countries have, once they took power, once they've used that kind of language to win elections legitimately, have often begun to then take apart their democratic systems. And of course, that's the threat of Trump. Not that he's going to be Hitler. Or that it's not. Don't imagine a Nazi movie. Yeah. Imagine rather the slow dismantling of institutions, the use of the IRS or the Department of Justice against Trump's political enemies or against media he doesn't like. That's the kind of thing that people who use this language have been doing, whether in Hungary or in Turkey or a decade ago in Russia. And when Trump says that he admires Putin or he admires Xi or he admires Viktor Orban, I think that's what he admires. They don't have to worry about these rules and norms and laws and the Constitution. I mean, I saw Kelly saying in several different places, in the Atlantic as well as the New York Times, I saw him saying, I kept telling President Trump that I swore an oath to the Constitution, that my loyalty is the Constitution, not to him personally. I'm loyal to the office of the president, not to Donald Trump. And he found that impossible to understand because, that's not part of the way he thinks about the world.
Anne Applebaum, thank you very much for your time tonight.